So you are creative, but still feel like something is missing. Your work is not as good as it could be. Maybe you're even disappointed at what you created. If not that, then maybe you just don't start the book you've always wanted to write or play the instrument you've always wanted to learn in the first place. Or maybe you throw yourself into a variety of creative endeavors, but none of them ever reach the finishing line. To me, these are the 3 potential problems I want to talk about in this video. You don't start, you don't finish, and you don't like the results. I can tell you that I went through all of these and still do at times. Let's start with starting. The starting path can look different for everyone. What exactly do you want to do, and why do you want to do that? What's your motivation behind it? Are you filled with an inspiration that you want to bring to the canvas? Or do you start programming, for example, because you heard it's a well-paid occupation? To me, one of the most important questions to ask if I don't start something is, what are you afraid of?
Because nothing interesting begins with knowing, it begins with not knowing. Uncertainty is such a difficult, dangerous thing that evolution has created a brain that tries to avoid it altogether. We do almost everything to avoid uncertainty. And yet the irony is that that's the only place we can go if we're ever going to see differently. And that's why creativity, seeing differently, always begins in the same way. It begins with a question. It begins with not knowing. It begins with a why. It begins with a what if.
When I can positively resolve this question, I am usually ready to start. So, what are you afraid of? Sure, maybe you just procrastinate because you currently feel lazy or have too much on your plate. If that's the case, then maybe rethink if what you set out to do is truly what you want. If I procrastinate, and I'm pretty sure many of you can resonate with that, is I procrastinate because I'm afraid of something. At the most basic level, I'm afraid that what I set out to do could fail. Maybe people will judge me for it, and maybe I even disappoint myself, because what I do is worse than what I thought I can do. This is the fear one has to overcome. It's the writer's block. The ambitions are too big, the scope of the project too large. A fear of rejection arises, and I would argue that none of it really got anything to do with a lack of creativity. Quite the opposite. Instead, we are so creative and so imaginative in what could possibly go wrong, what could our peers say, that it's just anxiousness all over the place.
What's special about the human brain is that we, during the evolution of the cortex, got a lot more space in between input and output. So other animals have these much closer together, so when they get some stimulus, they make a essentially reflexive response. In humans, as the cortex expanded, there's a lot more room there, which means that inputs can come in and sort of percolate around and get stored and get thought about, and then maybe you make an output or maybe you don't. And there's one other thing that happened with the expansion of the cortex, which is that we got a much bigger prefrontal cortex. That's the part right behind the forehead. And that is what allows us to simulate what ifs, to separate ourselves from our location in space and time and think about possibilities. What if I did that? What if I had done that? What if I could do that?
Listen to Rick Rubin, one of the greatest music producers of all time. What he says might sound trite and trivial. You've heard the do what you love mantra 1,000 times, but he gives it an interesting twist.
The only advice I would have would be to not listen to anyone and to do what you love and to make things that you love, whatever it is. Make your favorite things. Be the audience. Make the thing for you the audience. And it doesn't really matter what anyone else thinks. And if you have to get a job to support yourself so that you can make your art, that's fine. You can't make art for someone else. You can't make art with someone else in mind. I don't believe it can be good.
That last part about the job is something I want to get back to, because I want to make a case that it can actually be better for you if your creations are not your full-time job. I also think it's very powerful to think of yourself as the audience. I try to do that with my videos as well. I make videos that I would be interested in watching. And so by writing the script and by exploring the subject and creating, I get even more out of it than by just consuming the final product. It also makes a lot of sense as a founder. If you operate in a field that you enjoy, you will not only have more fun working, and if you start a company, you will likely have to work a lot. You also naturally grow into becoming an expert in that said field. We already got one of the greatest music producers, let's throw in one of the greatest film directors, Martin Scorsese. Do one for them, do one for you. if you can still do projects for yourself, you can keep your soul. I think it can, however, have the downside that you create something for yourself as you, the audience, and you still don't like what you come up with. You had a clear vision in your mind of what you're about to do, and then you created something and it doesn't come close to that vision. Unfortunately, if you want to do new things, you will face a force more powerful than other people's skepticism, your own skepticism. You too will judge your early work too harshly. We will talk about that in a second. But first, not finishing your project and self-discipline. We probably all had some sort of pet project that we started and never finished. And I think that's totally normal. That's part of the creative process and part of creative exploration. It becomes tricky and maybe not to your liking if this is not the exception, but it happens with every single project you ever do. You start, but it never sees the world. Maybe nothing you touch ever gets done. Nothing reaches the finish line. Why? To me, the main contributing forces to that are a project scope that's too big and gets overwhelming, acting out of impulsivity, and a lack of self-discipline. Let's start with the last part, which can vary pretty widely depending on your circumstances. I give you an example. If you're employed, you have to show up to work. There is no room for "I don't feel creative today." You are expected at the office, and that's that. If you're self-employed like me, you have more freedom, which is awesome, but you also need to build more self-discipline. If I don't feel like working for a few days, that's fine, and sometimes there are good reasons for that. The thing is that I need to be the one to get me back to work. This hasn't really been a problem in my almost 10-year career, but earlier this year I failed at that. I took a 2-week break in Thailand that turned into 12 weeks, in which I didn't work and lived off of savings. The funny thing is that you could look at that and be like, well, that's amazing. That's such a nice break, such a great way to reset. You are so privileged that you can do that, and that's partly true. But the problem is, I didn't feel great at all during that time. That break was not planned. I didn't want that break. And during that break, I felt like I lost my purpose and continuously built up more guilt of questioning what am I doing? Like, why can I not start something new? What's going on? Why can I not just work? Luckily, I've turned it around in September and I'm very happy with what I do again. If you're interested, I can talk about the steps I took in another video. One of the major reasons why I even got to that low point was because the project scope of what I set out to do was way too big. I built an app, had great inspiration and will to work, but no real sense of progress, since there was just so much to do and it got more and more every single day. I went from working 12-hour days to 0-hour days and haven't touched the project ever since. And I had a thought about this as well. I have some sort of problem with inspiration. There are two clashing ideas in my head that concern inspiration. One is to act immediately in case inspiration strikes, and the other one is to habitualize hours for creative work and not act out of pure impulsivity. I think I do my best work on impulses and inspiration, but I also lose more interest in the subject once the impulse is gone, leading to unfinished projects. I'm interested in what you think about that. I haven't really figured it out for myself yet. If my app project would have stayed a side project that I pour a few hours into every other week, I think it would still be alive and released at this point. That's why I think side projects can be very beneficial. They don't create so much pressure on yourself. This whole YouTube thing is a side project for me. So project scope is definitely something I will consider more thoroughly from now on. Which also leads me to my final and maybe most important point of the video. Sometimes you do creative work, but you don't like the results. Many great projects go through a stage early on where they don't seem very impressive, even to their creators. You have to push through this stage to reach the great work that lies beyond. But many people don't. Most people don't even reach the stage of making something they are embarrassed by, let alone continue past it. They are too frightened even to start. How do you avoid that? This is a difficult problem, because you don't want to completely eliminate your horror of making something lame. That's what steers you toward doing good work. You just want to turn it off temporarily, the way a painkiller temporarily turns off pain. I've watched the following clip by Ira Glass at least a dozen times, and it made something click in me.
Nobody tells people who are beginners, and I really wish somebody had told this to me, is that all of us who do creative work, like, we get into it, and we get into it because we have good taste. But it's like there's a gap that for the first couple years that you're making stuff, what you're making isn't so good, okay? It's not that great. It's trying to be good. It has ambition to be good, but it's not quite that good. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, your taste is still killer. And your taste is good enough that you can tell that what you're making is kind of a disappointment to you. You know what I mean? A lot of people never get past that phase. A lot of people at that point, they quit. And the thing I would just like say to you with all my heart is that most everybody I know who does interesting creative work, they went through a phase of years where they had really good taste, they could tell what they were making wasn't as good as they wanted it to be. They knew it felt short. It didn't have this special thing that we wanted it to have. And the thing I would say to you is everybody goes through that. And for you to go through it, if you're going through it right now, if you're just getting out of that phase, you gotta know it's totally normal. And the most important possible thing you could do is do a lot of work. Do a huge volume of work. Put yourself on a deadline so that every week or every month you know you're going to finish one story. Because it's only by actually going through a volume of work that you're actually going to catch up and close that gap. And the work you're making will be as good as your ambitions. In my case, like I took longer to figure out how to do this than anybody I've ever met. It takes a while. It's going to take you a while. It's normal to take a while, and you just have to fight your way through that. Okay?
I totally agree with all of that. Commit to produce something every day or week or month. And I would add one more element here. Try to improve one or two very specific things of your work every time. For me, that could mean trying out contrast editing, or to write a better hook at the start of the video, or to do a zoom in to emphasize a point. Whatever it is, try one or two new things every time and your toolkit of what you can do will grow into something amazing. Accepting that you will suck at first is, ironically, very empowering. So have patience. If you enjoyed this video, you will like my video about building an audience and why it's the most amazing thing to go from you as the audience to you and like-minded people as the audience. Thank you for watching.